I had an idea. I wanted to write something about the turn of the century from the 19th to the 20th century. Because I felt that was a very interesting time, because for us, it's very closer than to Americans. But for us, you have to imagine there were 1,000 years of monarchy. And all of a sudden, bang, it became a new society. Because by the end of the First World War, everything really collapsed. And what grew out of it was the 20th century. And we know that the 20th century was a terrible time in many respects. So I was interested in how that happened and how people felt at that time. Also because, you know, the millennium's end was coming, and I was expecting not really a similar situation, but we all discussed, you know, that the world as it is cannot last if we don't change our thinking, if we don't change the way we really use our resources, the way we connect to other people. And so I thought that would be interesting. And I was looking for some story to tell that. And of course I read at that time all these Viennese stories of Stefan Zweig and Joseph Roth, and I found not the right thing. And so I came up with the idea to do something about the Habsburg. And Harold Prince said, why don't you write a show about Franz Joseph, the last Habsburg emperor? Well, not really the last, almost. Because I've seen a picture, and Hal is always fascinated by picture. He builds all his shows on pictures. And the picture he had immediately in mind when I told him the story about you know, this turn of the century thing, he said, I have a picture that props up, which is in the middle of World War II, in 1916. All the fighting monarchs, the monarchs who were the head of the countries that really killed each other on the field, they came together in Vienna to bury Franz Joseph. And in a way, it was their own burial. And I thought, that's a great theatrical idea. But I don't betray a secret if I tell you it's not in my show, this scene. But it would have been a nice scene. But I was thinking about doing this, and I was fighting on doing this, and I was reading a lot, and I was making notes, and Hal always told me, put down every little episode, and we make something out of it. So I did that. That was a good way of starting, but it led me nowhere. I found very soon that Rudolf is a much more interesting character than Franz Joseph, and also I didn't see any development in Franz Joseph. He was a sad monarch, a nice man, but there was not really a development in him, a dramatic development. He didn't change a lot. So naturally, in rehearsing, in reading and researching all the material, I came very soon on Elisabeth, who is well known in Europe as Sissi, because there was an extremely successful movie about her teenage years. When she was a teenager, the daughter of lower nobility in Bavaria, she was a very wild young girl, and she fell in love, or the Kaiser, Franz Joseph, fell in love with her and married her, and she became the Empress of Vienna. That was a Cinderella story, and that became extremely successful, as I told you. And but also it developed kind of a legend of Sissi, which didn't appeal to me because I didn't really want to write such a sweet story. I was more interested, in this change between the centuries. So I dropped the idea, and I concentrated again on Rudolf, writing a Meyerling story. And then I came across a book that was called My Years with the Empress. It was written by a guy called Christomenes, and it was a Greek reader. Elisabeth, when she was in her 40s, 50s, she walked like crazy. She walked for 6 hours a day. But at that time, they didn't have iPods. So she needed a reader to entertain her. And he walked in front of her or next to her, and he was reading while she was walking. And that was that reader. And wherever she went, she had that reader with her. And of course, he became very close to her. And he wrote down a lot of things she said. And there was one moment which was really the birth of my musical Elisabeth. He describes they were on the ship Miramar, which is a boat she owned. That was her boat. And they were on the Mediterranean, and there was a storm. And usually, by the way, she didn't leave deck during the storm. She asked that she was bound to the mast, and she wanted to be in the storm. This woman was not scared. And after everybody left, and when the reader came up again after the storm, and she was released from the tethers, and then they were standing there at the rail, and they were looking behind the ship, and there was a group of birds, and she said to the reader, "Look up there. These birds are it's always the same group of birds that follows me." And he said, "Excuse me, Your Majesty, how do you know?" Could be different birds. And she said, "I know, because there's a blackbird among them." And at that moment, I still get the creeps when I think of it, because at that moment I realized she thinks she is a blackbird. She thinks she is the blackbird that really brings the downfall of the Habsburg Empire. Because what I knew at that time already was that she also was a Republican by heart. Imagine the empress of the biggest nation in Europe. She was an emperor. She was a Republican. She didn't believe in monarchy at all. So anyway, she felt, that the end was near. The end for the Habsburg Empire, but the end of the 1,000 years of that kind of society. And I couldn't help. I had to pick this person to become the one I wanted to write the show about.